Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. So it's been more than 15 years since the first Saw movie came out, and sequels and reboots are still being released. It's clear that they're doing something right. Now the Saw films are not perfect, very far from it. However, and I think most people would agree with me on this, there was something so uniquely intriguing and captivating about the first movie that none of the others could replicate. So in this video, we'll look at why the original Saw was so great. Just as a quick recap, the story follows Adam and Dr. Lawrence Gordon as they wake up chained by their legs in a decrepit dungeon. They have no idea where they are or why they're here, and on the floor in front of them is a dead body. What's interesting to see here is that the movie instantly starts off with an extremely claustrophobic feel. Everything is very close and almost pushed directly in our face to build the maximum amount of discomfort. This is very unusual. When it comes to most films, we normally start off with something that conveys the general location so we know where we are and who we're following. But Saw actively goes against that. And yes, this is due to its low budget and that they were only able to shoot in a single location. However, the director, James Wan, managed to take this limitation and turn it into a positive that gives the movie its signature feel. Everything is up close, and most of the time the actors are stuffed into the frame pushing at the borders. Having it so tight really sells the feeling that they're trapped. We eventually do get to see things beyond the dungeon, but it does a great job of setting the initial tone. And it might seem like I'm overanalyzing, but let's compare this to the opening of Saw 7, where two guys are in a public square behind glass fighting over a girl using saws.
Hey, call the police!
Now this moment doesn't quite have the same impact as the first one. Since we follow the people indoors as well as the ones outside, it feels much more like we're in the crowd looking in. In contrast, the original makes us feel like we're a part of it. Also, as Adam and Lawrence are introduced, we see that the camera is very shaky and usually closer to Adam, whereas it's much smoother on Lawrence, indicating that he's perhaps the calmer one among the two. And making Dr. Gordon a surgeon hints at what we might see at the end. But there's something more important that the original does that none of the other movies could ever replicate, and that is that we as the audience know just as little, if not less, than Adam and Lawrence. Again, if we were to compare this to any of the sequels, it makes sense why they can't raise the same level of mystery as the first one. By then we already know what the deal is, we can somewhat expect what's going to happen in the next 90 minutes. But in the first one we're totally clueless, and as more hints are revealed that indicate why they are here and how to escape, the movie invites us to solve the mystery along with the two guys.
That clock.
What about it?
It's brand new.
So?
So, somebody obviously wanted us to know the time.
Anyways, Dr. Gordon eventually mentions that he might know who put them here. Then in a flashback, we follow the detectives Tap and Sing as they arrive at a crime scene to see the killer's last victim. During the sequence, we see a man lying on a bed of barbed wire as increasingly more sinister details of the case are revealed. All of this is intercut with what looks like forensic photos. What I think this does so well is it obviously shows the sadistic nature of Jigsaw with a really entertaining trap. But the way we see it with the frequent photos gives it much more of an investigative feel. This highlights that it's not just about the killings, but also the mystery and hunt for Jigsaw. The trap just makes it more intriguing, which heightens our interest in the killer. This is again something that the other movies can't do, because there we already know who the killer is, since it's revealed at the end of this one. Here we feel like we're not only a part of Adam and Lawrence's game, but also of the police investigation to find the killer. Also, the smaller games are only one of many tools used to make it more mysterious and thrilling, whereas something like Saw 4 seemingly leans on the traps to have a movie in the first place. Something else that might seem arbitrary but works extremely well to set the tone are the colors. Almost everything looks washed out. Now the scenes with the traps have a much stronger green, and we'll get to the significance of that in a moment, but the rest of the movie looks quite bleak. Actually, bleak is an understatement. Everything looks dirty and borderline disgusting, and all of it's lit with fluorescent light. It's uneasy and uninviting, which is exactly how we're supposed to feel. This was one of my problems with 2017's Jigsaw. That movie looked beautiful, the lighting looked awesome and natural, and the colors, especially at the farm, were super saturated. But it looked like a warm, comfortable barn that some people are strolling through on a lazy Sunday afternoon. The only feelings I get from this bathroom is that it's cold, smelly, and wet. Okay, so by now you're probably screaming at me to talk about the death traps, but I just think it's important to show that this movie is more than just traps, something I may have not exactly helped to spread, but let's talk about them. As we get to know more about the killer, we see the increasingly bizarre games he puts his victims through. What's so unique about this is that we begin to fear the killer even though we have no idea what he even looks like. We're afraid, but we're not sure of who. It's an eerie thought to picture yourself in any one of these settings, forced to play some twisted game that makes you hurt yourself to be free. Arguably the most notorious one comes when Dr. Gordon is being questioned by the police when they find one of his pen lights at the crime scene. They take him down to the police station and make him witness the testimony of Amanda, the only known survivor of Jigsaw's games. In a flashback, she explains how she woke up with this metal machine on her head. We then see the TV turn on and a puppet starts explaining how she needs to get the key to unlock her mask from another person in the room, otherwise it will snap open and she'll die. Once again, the level of tension and discomfort are at their peak. The creepy puppet is practically shoved in our face, the technology looks shitty, and the mask is rusty. All of this sells the incredibly grimy feel. It looks homemade and realistic. Then comes a really interesting shot when Amanda tries getting off the chair. Now I know this sped up style would eventually become a little bit overused, and it's not exactly subtle, but I think it's incredibly effective. In only a few seconds, this hectic action instantly conveys the feeling of the adrenaline rush and time crunch that Amanda is under. We immediately understand what she feels like just with the motion of the camera alone. Also, the effect of circling Amanda makes it look like the room is spinning around her. This gives a feeling of disorientation and confusion, which Amanda is feeling when she wakes up. So she gets off the chair and walks towards the other guy. As the time ticks away, she begins stabbing him to get the key from his organs. When it's unlocked, the mask snaps open and she narrowly avoids death. Now, while other movies center around these kinds of death traps, I think Saw does the best job of conveying the sense of pressure, high stakes, and time limit with a meaningful use of motion, sound, and editing. But these traps do not come without their flaws. They're incredibly unbalanced. Like, why do Lawrence and Amanda have to go through such a big game compared to the smaller test for the others? And why do all the victims have to hurt themselves, yet Amanda only has to kill another person? But the concept of these games works enough that you can look past it. So at the end of Amanda's trap, the Billy puppet explains how most people don't care enough about their life, and neither did Amanda by being a drug addict. But by completing this test, she now has a greater appreciation for life. And many people call out the problems with the killer's philosophy, that he's trying to teach people to value their existence. And these motives don't really make a lot of sense, mainly because most of Jigsaw's victims don't end up having a life to value afterwards. But the movie is not saying that Jigsaw is correct. This is a trap I often fall into myself. Just because a character in the movie says something doesn't mean that the film is trying to say that it's right, or that you should believe it. In fact, I think there's a lot that hints towards that Jigsaw's logic is messed up. First of all, the kidnappers that put the people into the traps are wearing pig masks. Now that's not an animal that comes to mind when I think of something scary, but it fits so well because it almost feels like they're trying to tell us that the kidnappers, and by extension the killer, are pigs. Now when you call someone a pig, it's not very nice. In this case, it might be implied that the killers act like repulsive animals. This is further highlighted by the use of unmotivated pig squeals when Lawrence and Adam are kidnapped. Martin Scorsese actually used a similar technique in Raging Bull. During a boxing fight, there are sounds of lions and elephants to highlight the animalistic style of the fighters, and I think that's what this movie is trying to do as well. My interpretation is that it uses pig noises to symbolize the vile nature of Jigsaw. And look, I'm not trying to say that Saw is a masterpiece, it's not, but that doesn't mean that there isn't some meaning to what we're seeing. Especially given both James Wan's and Leigh Whannell's track record in the horror genre, I think these guys are a little too smart to just make some cheesy movie that leans on shock value and the lone plot device of death traps to sell it. And by the way, as I mentioned earlier, the strongest colors in the movie are the incredibly saturated greens during the traps. This is a tone that most people would associate with sickness and feeling ill, making it look like the traps themselves are sick. Now, you can say that the green is only used because it looks cool, and you might be correct, but that doesn't explain why these are the only parts of the movie with such intense color, with the exception of Adam's photo room, but that has to be red. So I believe the tones are deliberately chosen to stand out in this way to have this effect on us that it looks wrong. There's even a moment when the detectives find one of the people who's about to fight for his life in a trap. They break into the killer's lair and everything looks normal. However, when Jigsaw arrives, activates the machine, and the police try to get him out, the scene takes on a subtle green hue. The location didn't change, yet the colors turn green right when the trap is active. So while many people criticize Saw for wanting to justify the murders with some twisted morals, it seems like the movie itself is trying to get you to be repulsed by the killer's actions, not to sympathize with him or make him look like a good guy. The deaths cannot be justified, and they shouldn't be. The people that are kidnapped, they're not saints, but they don't deserve to die. However, this is one of the few parts of the movie that doesn't need to make sense. For this, I'd like to reference one of my favorite games of all time, Alan Wake.
Stephen King once wrote that nightmares exist outside of logic, and there's little fun to be had in explanations. In a horror story, the victim keeps asking why, but there can be no explanation, and there shouldn't be one. The unanswered mystery is what stays with us the longest.
In a horror movie, the victim shouldn't deserve to die, but that's what makes it scary. It means that everyone, even you, can be a target. It might become clear by showing an example from a different Saw movie. In the sequels, the writers try to humanize the killer by revealing that he lost his son. In Saw 5, it's shown that a man named Cecil killed his child in a robbery gone wrong. So he gets kidnapped and put into a trap where his face is cut by a bunch of knives. But during this sequence, it's unlikely that you have any sympathy for Cecil. He's a jerk, a criminal and killer himself. So when he dies, it doesn't carry as much emotional weight as when someone who doesn't deserve it does. When they're innocent, we tend to root for them. That's why Jigsaw's victims shouldn't be the worst people in the world. If that were the case, we won't care for the characters. Anyway, while Saw is known for its violence, it surprisingly has some pretty unique ways of scaring the audience. Even the jump scares have a very creative execution that still holds up more than a decade later, and some of the scary moments are unrecognizable if you rewatch them. It seems so much unlike what you'd expect from a Saw film. For example, there's a flashback to where Lawrence's daughter wakes up at night and goes to her mom. She explains how there's a man in her room and she's scared. When Lawrence takes her back to bed, we think it was just a nightmare or she's making it up, as the room is empty. However, when she's alone again, we see that someone's watching from the closet. This moment would be unthinkable in any of the sequels. Since she's a young child, we dismiss her, making us think that there's no one there. This strengthens the moment when we're wrong. This shows the diverse nature of the movie. It doesn't rely on jump scares and death traps, but it shows that much of the movie's fear doesn't come from loud noises or violent kills, but instead from the fear of being followed when you thought you were alone. There's also another great moment when Adam gets kidnapped. We see that he's in his apartment when the lights suddenly go out. Adam then begins hearing footsteps nearby. Eager to see who's out there, he tries looking for the person. Unfortunately, his flashlight doesn't work, so he takes one of his cameras and uses the flash to illuminate the room. Eventually, he opens a closet and gets attacked. I think this sequence demonstrates how skilled the filmmakers were. They understood how to carefully raise and release tension in a way that builds anxiety. The jump scare itself, well, they're more or less the same throughout horror movies, but it's the scene that leads up to it that makes it unique. Here we follow Adam in an over-the-shoulder shot that almost makes it look like a video game. We're right behind him, we're right with him. This puts us in the forefront of the action, so when the masked man jumps out, it doesn't just jump at Adam, but towards us as well. And the moments before Adam gets kidnapped try to get us comfortable following him, which immerses us in the scene. We can compare this to a similar scene in Saw 5, where Peter Strahm gets taken. In my opinion, this scene isn't quite as effective. We spend a lot of time looking at Strahm head-on in this sequence, so when he gets attacked, it feels more like we're spectating the events rather than being in them. That's why Saw 5 has to compensate for that with this insert shot of the pig mask. But the scary moments in Saw 1, they're not just good for a Saw movie, they're good in a general horror sense. Now the pacing of Saw is also surprisingly fast, even though there are countless limitations. Most of the time we're just stuck in this bathroom. However, something that gives it momentum and makes it feel alive are the small puzzles and obstacles the two encounter. When Adam and Lawrence wake up, they find a tape in their pockets. Once Dr. Gordon plays his, the last few seconds of the tape are what stand out. At the very end, he hears someone whispering, "Follow your heart." This leads them to dig through a toilet where Adam finds a bag with saws. He gives one to Lawrence and keeps the other for himself. However, there's something else in there that he tries hiding from him. There are always questions that are set up, and for every puzzle that's solved, they only get more increasingly ominous clues. For example, in one of his pockets, Lawrence finds a key, but it's not for either of their chains, nor is it for the door. Later, they use it on a small box, but in it they only find 2 cigarettes and a lighter, among other things. The mystery just keeps getting weirder and more complex. That's really the most interesting part of the movie. So towards the end, the story spirals out of control and Lawrence ends up sawing off his own leg in a makeshift amputation to escape and get back to his family. When he's gone, it's revealed that the killer was in the room the whole time. It's the man who we thought was dead. This twist works so well because almost everything that happens at the end was set up in the beginning like it should be. One of the officers mentions that Jigsaw likes a front row seat to his own games 19 minutes in.
There was someone standing outside here watching through this peephole. Looks like our friend Jigsaw likes to book himself front row seats to his own sick little games.
And arguably most importantly, the saw which Lawrence uses to free himself is revealed by the 14-minute mark. There are plenty more things that are hinted to at the beginning that pay off later, like a bullet, gun, and toilet lid to name a few, but I'm not trying to run through the entire story. Almost everything the movie gives us at the start is very deliberate and becomes an important story-bending element later on. This shows that Saw is not just some schlocky gore fest that we often see it being criticized as. Leigh Whannell's writing actually demonstrates skill in this aspect. The movie doesn't just pull random stuff out of its ass because someone thought it might make for a cool moment, but it's well thought out. Now don't get me wrong, as a whole, Saw is an experience that's incredibly in your face, but there are plenty of aspects that are respectable. And finally, the last shot of the movie is John slamming the sliding door shut, leaving Adam to die. This is eerily reminiscent of the iconic door slam in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre from 1974. So one thing that Saw probably suffers most from is its notorious reputation for being incredibly violent and bloody, but that's not really the case at all. Yes, there are a couple of pictures of wounded people, but the only crazy gory moment is a quick insert shot where Amanda digs through another man's organs for a key. The rest is all off-screen and basically just implied. Sadly, the sequels would play very heavily into this controversy and go so far over the top with its violence that they well deserve that notoriety. But if you were to judge Saw on violence alone, the first movie would be much closer to something like 7 than its own sequels. At the end of the day, I believe that Saw is a film that has plenty of restrictions, but it's executed in a way that plays heavily into the strengths while effectively minimizing its weaknesses, and even creatively turning the limitations into advantages. Alright guys, those were some of my thoughts on Saw 1. This was maybe 2% of what I would like to have said, but otherwise the video would be way too long. So I hope you enjoyed it, thank you so much for watching, bye guys.